Jen Bates,
Here.
Matt Bowman, Rich Gussenberg,
Here.
Ann Harrigan,
Here.
Jim Jenks,
Here.
Andrew Martelli,
Here.
Renee Martinez,
Here.
Chuck Neff,
Here.
Sylvia Nichols,
Here.
Kate O'Donnell,
Here.
Jeff Pangaro,
Here.
Anthony Perugini, and Don Walsh.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone will stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next item is approval of the minutes from November 2nd. You all received these from Marilyn. Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns on them at all?
I think it's November 18th, Jen. That's what it says on the agenda.
You're right, it does. I'm looking at the actual minutes from last time. Okay, sorry. Yep, November 18th. You were correct. So approval from the minutes of November 18th. The header on it actually says November 218.
Okay, I'll take care of
So
that.
you can just fix it. Yep, thank you.
We need a motion.
Yep, I was just seeing if anyone had any concerns. Everyone good? Oh, and I see
Motion to
Tony's here.
approve.
Thank you. Thank you. And second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone?
Aye.
Okay, anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. Minutes are approved. Next item is number 4. I'm going to pass this off to Chuck Neff.
Thanks, Jen. Yes, so the status report from Colliers, done a lot of work here in the last, since the last meeting, meeting with the options committee. So I'll turn it over to Chuck. He's going to walk through each of the scenarios. Again, just a reminder, these are draft scenarios. They're just the latest evolution with a number put to them for tracking. So last we kind of let him go through the options so we don't get anything lost with them. And then, you know, when he gets through them, we can open it up for discussion, comment, etc. So go ahead, Chuck.
All right, thank you, Chuck Warrington with the Colliers. As Chuck Ness said, in last couple of weeks, you know, with the scenario committee, Renee, Andrew, and Sylvia were on that, as well as Chuck and Jen and Vin and Superintendent Solon. We've been working on the scenarios and really refining them and tweaking them. And there's been little nuances to each one that we've been working on. Most importantly, I think what we're going to show you tonight is really expanding these options, not just looking at the first project, if you will. We've been talking a lot about, is it a new middle school, elementary school, renovation, high school, et cetera. We've taken and expanded those to look at all the schools as a school modernization plan, again, in a draft form, looking at different variations of the plan. Okay, they do say either renovate high school, new middle school, or elementary school. What happens with the remaining 3 or 4 elementary schools, depending on the scenario? What do we do with those? And so we've kind of looked at them as, okay, if we address them under a CIP plan, where it's more of a maintenance and individual project type plan. And we also looked at it as if we're going to renovate all of them, just to kind of give you some ranges of costs and of the different scenarios, so we can see what's the total range here we're talking about. So I have about 10 different sheets I'm going to walk you through. They're in a draft form. I'm going to go through them really slowly, just because there's a lot of little intricacies to these. So I think it'd be important to, they're ones you've heard of before, but there's really 4 or 5 different ones, with either doing the elementary schools under a CIP plan or renovating those. Those are really the major differences in these. So with that, I'm just going to kind of jump into it and go kind of one by one. Feel free to ask any questions as we go through. There's a lot of information here for it. And again, these are in draft form. I just ask you to keep that in mind. So with that, and I'll zoom this up as much as I can. So the first one we're calling, it's a scenario 1A, where it's a new elementary school. And in this version, we were assuming, you can see there's 3 different options with an elementary school for 550 student enrollment, a 600 and a 700, based upon what we've received feedback from Malone Broom. Probably a 700 student enrollment for a K-6 school is probably the most realistic to give us the most flexibility and impact to your space needs that we've identified. In each of these, just to kind of explain the form a little bit, and I gotta say Chuck was very instrumental in kind of helping us form this. We list obviously the school, the project, the 8-year high enrollment, where if it's a new or renovation project. We're listing the size of the building, and that's the low and the high in our process. And again, the low side of things on, say, a new school is typically meeting the space standard. That's that 8-year enrollment multiplied by the factors that we've discussed in the past, and we multiply it by 5% for the exterior walls. The high building size, the GSF, gross square foot, is what GSF means. That we're at an additional 10% due to anticipated programming, special ed, intervention type programs that might be needed or anticipated in an ed spec. So that's why you're going to see a delta there. And then the low and high total, these are total project budget numbers in the center column here. Again, that's associated with that square foot cost and associated multipliers within the budget. And then the last column is the estimated district share. Again, low and high based upon whether new or renovation status. We assume in these cases there'd be a space waiver that would be applied. We'd have to look on a case-by-case basis, but most of these we're assuming we wouldn't get a reduction of the reimbursement rate. We assume about 7.5% in eligible costs to all of them as well. And this gives us gives you a good feel for what it's going to cost the district, not just the total project, but how much you probably have to bond, at least for these major projects. So that's the columns here. With respect to, so in this program, in this one here, again, we're assuming a 700 student elementary school between 95 to 103,000 square feet. We talked about it, probably in that northern part of town, north central, maybe northwestern part of town, subject to availability. Total project budget 55 to 66 million, and you can see a district share anywhere from like 36 to 44 million, plus or minus on that. In this plan, we would then assume that the remaining elementary schools as well as Dodd would be handled under your capital improvement projects, your capital improvement plan. No renovations per se in this option. And we assume some values of anywhere, and this is over a 10-year plan, 15 to 25 million for each of the schools. With those, we're assuming there's no reimbursement, even though there might be like a roof plan or a window replacement, but that would be kind of bonus money. So we're just assuming that none of that would be the full boat would be your share. So we're showing that full value. Dodd, we up that to 30 to 45 million. Again, these are kind of some ballpark numbers. We haven't developed a detailed CIP plan for it. And then the final plan would be renovating the high school, because that's been identified many times to in this plan to renovate it. We're showing the existing size of your school, and because of the future enrollment, that school is actually larger than what you need. So we're not showing it being any larger than that. And that's projected to a midpoint, you'll see, of 2030. And that escalation cost is a factor, a pretty large factor in that particular option. And again, a share of 88 to 109 million. So adding these up, in this specific option, and this will go a little bit faster once we get through, we'll get kind of a flow. Your total project budget could range from 282 to 375 million. Again, depending on different variables, different ed spec programs, et cetera. The biggest variable is really probably in high school. And then the estimated district share for this option, 200 to 273 million dollars. And again, this is and it doesn't include Humison. We're not sure. We haven't got to that part yet. That's got to be be put into the mix. We put TBD here, but that's a total plan over 10, maybe even 12 years when you get to the high school for that. So this is really given a big picture look at it. This is something in the again in our subcommittee that was requested so we can see the big picture. Any questions on that first one that I can clarify?
Chuck, as you go through these, can you just restate the assumptions that you have listed there in the bottom? So for example, in this one, the pre-K would be moving to Highland in this example, and so on.
Correct.
Just kinda,
So the
as we
new
go through, just hit 'em.
elementary, yep, nope. New K to 6, approximately 700 students. We're assuming Darcy and Chapman would come offline in this option. And again, not necessarily final, but these are some of the assumptions. Pre-K, yeah, Chuck, as you know, that'd move over to Highland, assuming there's space there. We're assuming we're not requiring any other additions to the existing elementary schools in this option. And Dodd would remain as a 7-8 middle school, and again, renovating high school.
Chuck, is that an error that the other elementary schools are all K through 5 now? Shouldn't that be K through 6?
That would be K to 6. Yeah, that's an error
Okay.
on our sheet. That would be K to
Just
6.
making sure.
We probably had about 8 or 10 of these sheets, so my apologies. But that would be K to 6. Yes, thank you.
Chuck, your assumption is that I guess the new school would have a higher enrollment, thus taking some of the students out of Highland and making room for the pre-K. Is that how you're figuring it?
Yes, we're assuming there'd be some level of redistricting with the town in general to basically take probably most of the Chapman students into this new elementary school, relieve some of the Highland district, and make it. And this is an approximate figure to consolidate, into that school and make room.
This is Renee. So I just want to quickly summarize this plan and put it in context of the whole modernization plan. And thank you, Chuck, for putting this together. So basically, start with an elementary school, renovate the existing schools, and then renovate the high school. So that's it.
Well, this one's only CIP, Renee. The next
Correct.
option has a renovation. It's the same plan, but renovation. If I go to the next page, this is basically the same plan, same option, except now we're renovating the remaining schools to be intact. And as you can see in the columns, in the rows with Doolittle, Highland, and Norton, there's quite a bit of difference in those costs. If I go back between these, we assume 15 to 25 million only on CIP. That's not a renovation.
No, sorry, I misused the word. I
Yep.
tripped up with the words. That is correct.
Yeah. So capital improvement plan, and kind of as a parlay into this one, what we did is we developed budgets based upon the existing square footage of the school only, no additions. And the difference with this plan is really to renovate these schools in full, fully modernize them. The one part we don't have refined is when in the timeline would those take place, because to take care of all these at one time, that's a lot of work. So we'd have to work out the timeline, but we assumed the escalation to be out, I think, 6 years on these, 5 to 6 years on these three. And again, the high school, being the same, and keeping that as the CIP, because it's got some attention it's needed, but I don't know if you'd have to do the whole renovation on that. We can add that cost easily in another type of an option. And as you can see, these are little variances. You're going to see these variances between all the options we're going to show you tonight. There are little tweaks here and there so you can, again, see the total cost. So when you go from, in this case, again, CIP versus renovating the elementary schools, we go from the low of 283 to about 358, and a high of 376 million to 451 million. So you can kind of see, and we're eventually going to develop a matrix that kind of has all these summarized by, plan. These are hot off the press today. Your district shares 225 to 228 versus 200 to 273. And I think these are the numbers that are probably going to be, I'm guessing, more interesting, because even though these numbers go up quite a bit, you're going from 200 to 225. So for the low side, and then 273 to 286. So again, depending on different assumptions, you're looking at what do we got here? 20, 25, 15 to 25 million to renovate all your schools to the district's cost as a delta. A lot of information here. I'm trying to go somewhat slow, let everybody kind of catch up and absorb this a bit. We'll certainly send this through for everybody, but it's going to be quite a bit. So any questions on those two scenarios? And they're very similar, just renovation versus CIP for elementary school.
Chuck?
I have a question. Chuck, so does the renovation even of the elementary schools, is all include the air conditioning?
Yes, the unit prices we use in the budgets include fully renovating, new electrical, mechanicals, air conditioning, rooftop units, dedicated outside air. All basically, you're gutting these buildings and bringing them to a like new condition. When we say renovate, that's a like new, like renovate like new. You might have heard that terminology.
Yeah, I have heard that term. Is that also though the A scenario?
So in the first one under the CIP, and the big difference is the capital improvement plan. These wouldn't, and these numbers we're carrying are somewhat subjective. These don't necessarily carry new HVAC mechanicals. We would have to do a more in-depth look at each school and identify those needs specifically. We haven't done that on a case-by-case basis, but I wouldn't say that these include that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chuck,
Yes.
I assume that we would, as a committee, be able to mix and match. So for instance, if we thought Highland School was in pretty good shape and could be done through capital improvement, but Norton may be required, more extensive work, in the end, we could, pick and choose the final plan.
Absolutely, and you're 100% right, Rich. These are refinements of scenarios, and this is probably what's going to happen is you're going to select certain schools, like let's renovate one and just do CIP and the other where they're in better shape to really fine tune that cost a little bit better. I certainly expect that to happen.
Thanks.
We have all the raw work kind of done with these for the most part. Now it's mixing and matching and trading out parts and pieces of each one to come up with the best solution for you.
Would we be in this in the new elementary school, and we're taking Dodd offline? Would we be putting the new elementary school where, I'm sorry, Chapman offline? Would we be putting the new elementary school where Chapman is now?
I'm not sure. We'd have to study it a little bit more because the site is advantageous in our opinion. There's some positives to that site on the north end of the site. The question, I don't think by observation at a high level, Jim, that it could support 95 to 100,000 square foot school. That would require about 25 acres of property to build one. We're doing one right now, actually, in South Windsor. The last school they're doing is 102,000 square feet. That parcel's 25 acres, and we're pressed to get it's going to be a good site. But I don't think the Chapman parcel would support 100,000 square foot without at least considering taking all the kids out and using that existing footprint as part of the plan. You could certainly do a smaller school on the northern portion if you wanted to replace it in kind, but I think we might be stressed to do that.
Why couldn't we, I mean, obviously I'm not an architect, but why couldn't the new elementary school be, taller rather than kind of going out?
We could certainly do that. We'd have to look at the zoning, Jim. It might be able to, and we haven't done a study on the height. I think it's either 30, I'm guessing, I think it's 30 or 35 feet might be the height on the zoning there. We'd have to consider that. I'm going to bring up Al's for additions. If I just bring up the Chapman site here. So this is and I might have shown this before, I think. This is the Chapman site. It's a Google Earth view, of course. We took the parcel map, the GIS mapping before we drew this and underlaid it to give us your property lines. To my knowledge, the inside white line would be your setback lines, if you will. And and this is that northern part of that parcel that would be build in kind while this is in still being operated. We've done that. It's tight. But anything, you can go a little bit larger than the existing if you go up 3 stories, and obviously you can get some more square footage, and that's that subjective part. But that's typically the 3-story wings are typically your academic wings, but when you still have your gym and cafeteria, your common spaces, those are typically still a singular type or story and a half, if you will. That would have to be studied further, though, in bringing out an architectural team to really do some homework on it.
And what are some of the costs? Sorry.
I was going to say it's a good segue. I know that you're talking about the new Chapman Elementary School. We want to keep moving. It's a good segue to scenario 2A on the next sheet, though, if you want to show what another option would be there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think this will answer your question.
I think, like Rich said, these are going to kind of mix and match, and you're going to see some solutions and projects like, what if we mix, 1 and 2 in this element? That certainly can be done, and this is kind of the vetting process. So, in scenario we're calling 2A, which starts with a new 6 to 8 middle school. 2B is a new 7 to 8 middle school, and we'll cover that. So in this option, it's a 6 to 8 middle school, a new parcel, also potentially a new Chapman Elementary School, because we have heard your local constituents and their feedback on it. So we did do a high-low budget for the projected enrollment for Chapman as it is for for K-5 in that option here, and this is where those are accurate. The other one should have said K-6. So these would be a K-5 with grade 6 moving up, assuming a new Chapman for that enrollment, rough mid 40,000 square foot range, 26 to 32 million plus or minus either way. And then you can see your district share here. The new 6-8 middle school, approximately 1,200 student enrollment, a large school. This is, you're looking at 200,000 square. This is a big school for this type of enrollment. It's almost the size of a high school because really your enrollment, 112 to 136 million. And I think this was the range in the last study, if I recall, is around 115 million. So it's still in that ballpark, 75 to 90 million reimbursement. And then again, as in the previous option, we looked at, okay, just doing CIP for the remaining schools. And Rich, as you noted, maybe we do CIP for Highland. Maybe we do some more intensive, maybe renovation in a Norton or a Doolittle, maybe, depending on the conditions. The big question here is what would we do with Dodd? There's been discussion of moving central office, moving Hummiston over there with alternative high school. But that would, I think we talked at one of our last meetings, there's 127,000 square feet. So we saw the question, what we do with the rest of that. And then renovating the high school, again, keeping all the schools in the options. And that was what we heard from the subcommittee, is to look at them in whole. And so this total, you can see the numbers, 337 to 432. Again, as you pick an option, those will dial into a number, and then the district shares are there 226 to almost 300,000 for a district share, again, over 10, 12-year program. So that brings it, kind of introduces that, elementary, but it's actually smaller than the existing, which we feel could fit on that existing parcel. But again, as we see these different options, we're going to start adding different recipes and different ingredients into each one, and it's going to tweak them a little bit.
Hang on a second there, Chuck. I think, Tony, you had a question. Was it relative to this
Yeah,
option?
very, very quick. Charles, thanks for this. I love how the team is mixing up the options. Just want to raise something. So Chapman, the area in and around Chapman, 3 years ago when we were talking about potentially using Cheshire Park as a location for middle school, we heard a lot from neighbors in and around the Chapman area about traffic concerns and the like, which we're not going to address tonight, but I wonder where during the process, would there be more information to share around these options before they're finalized around potential traffic studies, things like that? Or is that something that happens after everyone agrees on an option and do further study? Only because I know we're going to get a lot of feedback, which is great from the community, but anything on Route 10, I guarantee you there'll be a lot of people speaking up.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I think with respect to the traffic, that would probably land towards the latter part of evaluating these, and we're going to talk about a matrix of eventually get into evaluating all these options and the different factors that you will want to use to evaluate the pros and cons and which ones are more advantageous. And traffic could be one of those factors that we throw into there.
Thanks, Charles.
So the other 2A with the new 6-8 middle school, only thing changing is renovating all the elementary schools. And again, do you have to do all 3 of them? No. You could pick and choose depending on the conditions, like Rich said, and you can kind of see the numbers. They do obviously rise up. Those are all the same. We're using the same escalation factors. That will change the cost a bit depending on when they get done and when they're initiated. But these assume, I think, 5 or 6 years out on escalation for them. So, just comparing for a high 509 from 432. Obviously, you're 75 million here and roughly 150 million or so for all 3 of those on the high. And again, variations in your reimbursement. So again, the one question for us is, what do we do the rest with DOD? We'd have to strategize on that and figure out how we're going to use that, and talk with OSCGR and any of these options. We certainly want to make sure they're on board with you to support your program for that. The next one is 2B. So this is the variation here is a 7-8 middle school versus a 6-8 middle school. I think this is an option thrown out by one of the members, and we talked about it in our working group. This is, certainly an option in all of them, but this one specifically that I think we would recommend, the Board of Ed, it's a matter of how you want your middle school program to be and what your philosophies are on that's something that we can't evaluate, but we just throw everything on the board and put it out there. Obviously with a new 7-8 middle school, it is the size is less because simply enrollment. As you can see, the price tag's smaller as well, from roughly 80 to 100 million thereabouts, in district share 55 to 66 million. We carried the new Chapman Elementary School option in here. That was again a discussion of due to the condition of Chapman, if we were to keep that, is it worth renovating? And really the news here, and I didn't discuss in the last option, is what's the cost differential of renovating versus building a new Chapman? And as you can see here, because of the size of the school here, the square footage, the total cost is pretty darn close. It gets a little smaller, but it's sized for your enrollment. So there's some of the nuances in these that you really weigh it out and go, okay, do we want to, renovate that or design a new one that's programmatically better for what you need. So that's an evaluation of which one's better for your district. Again, capital CIP for the remaining elementary schools in this assumption. And then because of the 7th and 8th grade go, and you have Dodd Middle School, we said, okay, what if you made that a 5-6 school? And again, this is to the town Board of Ed. That would fit nicely for those grades, but that's a
Service years, excellent.
it's a philosophical, question with Board of Ed that we can't answer there. But we threw it out there and we said, let's carry 30 to 45 million for the CIP. Again, a lot of discussions to be had on this. And then renovating the high school, again, a good 10 years out to the midpoint. And then again, what do we do with Hummiston? That's still kind of a question, that's an outlier in that regard.
Chuck?
Yes, Richard.
My sense is that you might be overbuilding if you kept Dodd online, and then you still have 4 elementary schools. It seems to me that you're going to have more space than you need.
Yeah, Rich, that's a good segue. And we took this pretty quickly. This is one of the options that honestly, our recommendation would be, Malone and McBroom haven't really analyzed this one as in depth as options 1 and 2 yet. And Rebecca's here with us from Malone, but I think because of that, there might be an option to take one of the elementary schools offline. They haven't really dove into reorganize and to study that with moving the district lines. And that's something we want to talk about is if this option and trying to use their fees and their services, in an efficient manner, is this a strong enough option that we'd want them to investigate that more and dive in and see what that result would be, Rich?
Okay.
I think it's a good observation, though. So in this case, a 7-8, and then again, the difference being, let's see here, make sure I didn't copy. I probably just didn't change this, but this should have been renovations here, but you can see these are renovation numbers in the values, similar as the other options. Not much difference than the other two. So again, little nuances here. Yeah, I saw Matt there. The coverage for Chapman is 10 to 15%, and height allowance is 40 feet. So 40 feet would typically support 3 stories, and you probably have to with a 10 to 15%. You couldn't spread it out too much. That's not a whole lot of allowance on coverage there. So that's the 2B. So 2A is a 6-8 and 2B being a 7-8 middle school to start with. Option 3A, this is renovating the
Just
existing.
1 second, just to go back about the reason it's 10 to 15% is I'm not sure if that's in an R20 zone or an R40 zone. In an R20 zone, the coverage would be 15%. In an R40 zone, the coverage would be 10%.
I think it's R20, if I remember.
Okay, then you've got a 15% coverage.
Yeah, I think it was. I was looking at those, Matt, and I'm going off of recollection here, so I'd have to confirm that.
Judging by the lots in the neighborhood, it's probably R20.
Yeah, it's definitely a smaller neighborhood. I have the notes for that. So so the 3A, this is the one recommending renovation of the high school as the first project in here. And then in this option, if we renovate the high school first, we still have the problem of the elementary enrollment and the space demands and requirements for more space at your elementary level. So in this, we would we threw in the option of a new middle school with it. And to provide relief, if, in either a 6-8 or 7-8, and we kind of talked about those recently. So this would have to be discussed a little more in this option of which way you would want to move. But the one thing that does get modified quite a bit is that the price tag of the high school, moving it up 10 years, and those escalation costs do dramatically come down. So in this option, it's 120 to 150 million. The prior options was 153 to 190 million. So there's quite a bit of difference just in we use 3.5% compounded in our budgets, just so you know. But you still have some hardships with space, and thus a new middle school. The other option I'm going to show you is a new elementary school, similar to option. Basically, you're taking this option, putting the renovation in front, and it's either option 1 or 2 again, in a nutshell. Just moving the high school up in the time frame. Again, capital improvements for the remaining schools. Again, you can see these price tags here. The other, the variation here is just renovating the remaining elementary schools. So the first couple, these, we bolded the one that we assumed in the total, by the way, where you see this or one or the other. We use the bolded value in the subtotal.
Chuck?
Yes.
As we look at something like renovating the high school, when you were talking about renovating the elementary schools, you were talking about gutting them completely and rebuilding them.
Mm-hmm.
You could do if you built a new elementary school first and moved the kids around.
Sure.
How would you do something like that at a high school that's still functioning?
It'd have to be a phase. It would be definitely a challenge to renovate in place. We've done it. Typically, a lot of times some of the times we've seen where you do somewhat of an addition, but what you have to do is we have to look at the programming, tighten up the programming, and find in a high school, I would recommend probably 8 to 10 classrooms at a time if we could find them. And you basically move methodically through the space, and it takes quite a while, and it's multi-phase construction. It's
Doesn't that
not
drive
easy.
your costs way up?
Well, what it does, it would drive it up to a certain degree because the length of construction is obviously there. So your general conditions with either a general contractor or a CM are going to be longer. With a CM, they generally range anywhere from 70 to 90,000 per month. Your phasing requirements, and also in renovation, there's existing conditions that come into play where we do have owners contingency in the budgets. But there is a certain amount of unknown conditions that come into play that we have to just be aware of. There's definitely risks associated with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like we went and looked at the new middle school in North Haven.
Mm-hmm.
But there they added a whole classroom wing on.
Yeah, that was the OPM. I know that job well. So
and then knocked down the old wing that
Mm-hmm.
was on the other side of the building. So
yeah, and if there's parcel, if your property can support that,
Okay.
Yeah, they built 135,000 square feet on the south side of the school, of the admin, the cafeteria, the gym. There's that whole central corridor, that main portion, and where the fields are at now is where all the classroom spaces were at. Right. And that was advantageous for that site. It worked out very well.
I don't know if that would work for our high school.
Yeah, we haven't studied the site, Rich, to be honest. Again, this is looking just at a high level, looking at the cost. The concern here, it doesn't address your need at your elementary level. It's not going to do anything for that. It's not going to impact that. It's not going to provide additional space. So that's from looking at the data and in the enrollments, that's a concern, from a data-driven perspective in that regard. And then again, I have the same one. I might have this. No, let's see, 3A. And then this one here. So there's a renovation of the schools, and then going into a new elementary school versus a new middle school. Again, the high school, the price is the same. A K to 6 elementary school, and this would assume that elementary school would have enough room to redistrict the other schools without doing additions. in the next portion, but this is just CIP for the rest of the schools. Again, looking at the extreme kind of low side in this, not to say it's the best option. Doesn't resolve any space issues or not as many space issues. So, and then right away anyways. These projects, by the way, whether it's, you know, renovate high school and new middle school or elementary school, the big question for us is, do they go at the same time or are they staggered 4 or 5 years out? And that's a discussion we would need to have, because if they're staggered, that's where it doesn't address the space issues. If you did them at the same time, then yes, it could address them. But now you're talking in this option, $180 million price tag to start off in renovating and building a new school. That's a pretty heavy lift for most districts, not to say it can't be done. So again, a lot of variations and questions around these. And then the alternate being renovating the remaining elementary schools in addition to the new doing CIP for Dodd. And again, Humiston's still out there, but the focus being on, you know, really the elementary schools and the school propers. We are working, we didn't get to finish the scenario 4 for a new high school on that option, but in that option, what we're looking at is construction of a new high school. Now, whether that's on the existing parcel or a different parcel, question is there another parcel? We don't know that at this point. But if you did it on, say, the existing parcel, the big question now is, do you demolish the existing high school? We'd have to look at the site and see what you have left over for space. Do you demolish that, or do you renovate that into a middle school? But the size of that is very large. For 6 to 8, it's too big. Wouldn't be supported by the district. Yes, Matt.
Yes, it's too large unless you bring in the alternate high school and the Board of Education and combine those, then it's not too large. Then it actually, in my opinion, it works much better than than your you know, it's 100 classrooms that you have to fill. But I think that could be done. If you build a new high school, then you're moving the existing kids. You're taking the kids from Dodd, putting them in the high school. You have the ability to do, when you're bringing them in, you have the labs that are there now, your science labs, your language labs, your math labs, they're all adequate right now for high school students. Why wouldn't they be adequate for your junior high school students? I just think you're going to get more bang for your buck doing a high school and combining and closing Darcy. You're certainly then going to have the ability to close Doolittle, Dodd, and you're going to have the ability to close Darcy. And you know, no one's taken into consideration, and I'm just throwing this out there. Darcy's on 12 acres, a little over 12 acres. You're allowed under current zoning regulations, and certainly under the state regulations of affordable housing, you have the ability to put 16 units to the acre at an average price of about $30,000 per unit. That'll bring you in about $5 million. If you did something like that and took that $5 million and put it towards either looking for a parcel for the high school, you have that money, you possibly or potentially could have that money available.
Okay. No, thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I know one concern from the Board of Ed, and of course they can clarify, is that with the central office, more so the alternative high school, the needs of that program needing to be separate from other, certainly the high school. I don't know about middle school kids, but that's one, what I recollect the Board of Ed being concerned is that program being with another school, it should be separate the way I understand it.
Well, Chuck, I would certainly say that you would want the alternate high school of 30 students, 6 classrooms. You might want their own entrance, and you might
That one's got some intricate, some of those type of options, and what do we do with the old high school is probably the big question. But then again, addressing your elementary school need for additional space, that our data is telling us that you need that immediately, not 10 years down the road. So that certainly should be a factor with these. So with that's what we have today from the last meeting. There was a lot of good discussion with, I think, the subcommittee in trying to get a better idea of the big picture of the full program. I at least from a financial perspective, I think this hopefully gives you a better idea of what we're looking at total. And we're saying 10-year program, it might be 12. I mean, these things change over time as well. So.
Chuck, on the update, I think this is good, kind of presenting what we got as full plans on here. And I think it's a good thing to also look at also how we want to evaluate these. If you want to touch on what we kind of discussed as far as a matrix, because if you look at the bottom line on a lot of these options, what goes first, what goes second, a lot of what we're doing to the schools is the same. It's just the timeline you're doing them, and that's what affects the price. So there's going to have to be a decision between the $210 million option versus the 195, and kind of how we're going to help form those decisions off the scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. And I'll show. So we're getting, I think, close to the point where the options are starting to come. We're starting to get a clear picture on your different types of options. If there's anything we haven't considered or looked at, we try to listen to all the parties and incorporate them into a scenario or scenarios. We're getting to the point where we're going to have to start evaluating and ranking these and looking at pros and cons and looking at all the different aspects of each and which ones are better than others in different aspects and different facets, if you will. What we're going to share is a matrix. This is a matrix that we developed with Wethersfield schools that it's a starting point, but it's a tool that we use to rank the different scenarios to see, okay, what's the best scenario for your town. At the top, you can see different factors, 21st century learning, safety, security, etc. Scenario duration, total length of program, attractiveness to families, scenario value, debt impact, obviously with cost and district reimbursement kind of goes in that with as well. These are just ones we use there. These are fully changeable. We would certainly 100% encourage the subcommittee and the committee to, and not in light of what the scenarios are out there now, but and maybe we should have done this in hindsight. I was telling Chuck Nath, I said, maybe we should have done this before we started developing scenarios. What are the criteria that you're going to use to evaluate what the best scenario is for the town of Cheshire? And maybe we should have done this ahead of those in hindsight. But either way, these factors, and I wouldn't go any more than 7 or 8 factors. I wouldn't go out to 10 because it gets watered down. And some of these might get tied in with each other. But certainly the committees need to come up with some factors that are important to you when evaluating these. Traffic, we mentioned that on Route 10 being important. But we listed all the different scenarios that we're kind of talking about on the left and then figuring out, okay, how do we rank these and what factors do we use? So this is a starting point. Certainly can be modified, tweaked, to best fit this program.
And I think on this, we were talking about, these are really just the headings on the scenarios, and we can take a deeper dive as far as how each scenario affects that one on a school by school, possibly even weighting them where one may be given higher weight than the other and coming up with a gross score that you're kind of coming out with. So that was the thinking behind that there. Rob, I saw your hand go up there.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you, Chuck. Sorry for interrupting.
No
The other Chuck Warrington, I think this is an excellent form to be using. And one of the things that I might throw out there, and I'll speak a little to this later from the town council's perspective, but you've got debt impact and some other matrix on here. And from our perspective, I think it's really not just what the debt impact is, but really what is the mill rate impact as we roll this plan out on the backs of the taxpayers. And what I mean by that is you may have a larger cost plan that derives certain consolidations and therefore savings either in operating costs and or capital costs. So the net cost to the taxpayer, therefore the impact to the mill rate, could potentially be less than maybe a lower cost option that doesn't have those kinds of savings. So I was going to talk to this later, but I think this is certainly the opportune time that, at least from the council's perspective, I think we're really going to be looking at how we roll a plan that works for the school system onto the backs of our taxpayers, and that's all of our taxpayers. And really, we're going to be looking at the impact to the mill rate, and we're going to be doing certain financial projections over the course of this rollout, along with, Jim Jascott in our finance department, to take into account all of the other things that are going on within the community at that time. So we can really get a net effect. And I think maybe there's a way to kind of roll something into this matrix that takes a little more of what I'm just saying into kind of thought versus just the direct impact to debt, because I don't know that that's a correct way that at least I'm looking at it as a town council member.
I think that's a good point, Robin. Something they can definitely go with as far as that being part of the grading scale for it. And I mean, with all the options kind of that we roll out, we're going to have a score for that eventually. So.
Well, and I guess just to underscore it a little more, let's assume you led, and again, I'm not weighing in on any plan. That's your job to do, but I'm just using as an example. Let's assume you came up with phase one was to start a new 6 through 8 middle school. And as a result of that, you would open up some population capability in the elementary schools to the point where you could consolidate some of those elementary schools, maybe take offline a few of those schools, including Humiston. What kind of savings are you going to derive by the first phase of this, really closing some schools and being able to consolidate so that you can get significant operating savings and capital savings? Because as you know, we're doing capital improvements to some of these older schools that we would hope we're not going to have to do any longer. We are doing the Band-Aid approach. We are not interested in doing the Band-Aid approach any longer. The whole point of SMC is to come up with a plan that works for the schools, but we can manage on the backs of the taxpayers in a way that the council thinks works. So, that's the challenge, folks. And I know it's not an easy thing to do, but I think the more we collaborate on this and we think more about it, kind of from the perspective I'm coming from, I think we got a better shot of figuring out which is the best plan to roll out phase one wise.
Thank you, Rob. Anybody have any other comment on the options or on the grading there? Go ahead, Jen.
So I just wanted to clarify again that this spreadsheet that Chuck has up on the screen is really from another project he was working on. So those headers across the top of the page are really things that came from the template from the other school. So all of those things are things we can certainly think about, but they are going to be replaced with things that are important to us in Cheshire. So we will definitely add the mill rate in there. We're going to talk about population impact and things like that. But those things, those headers that are up there now, are just carryover from the template that we're using.
Thanks, Jen. Go ahead, Matt. Yeah, I see you. You got to unmute yourself.
If we could go back to that, the one thing that I would like to see added on to that, if we could, is increase in value of properties over like one scenario to another. Would there be an increase in value? And the other thing that I'd like to add too, that maybe we're not looking into as much is we're going to have an increase, or supposedly an increase in the population in the elementary schools. But right now in Cheshire, there's 600 apartments and condos that are approved that haven't not been constructed. Now, maybe that's been taken into consideration by Mylone and McBroom, but are we also taking into consideration the increase in our tax base, therefore revenue coming into the town? And also, there is probably approximately 100 new homes either approved or in the pipeline at planning and zoning. And we have to also look at the increase of value there and the increase in revenue to the town. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, just to follow Matt, that's exactly what I was trying to get at. That, you know, I think it's important to make sure that as you begin to define which plans you want to look at, that you roll them out with our finance department based on what's happening elsewhere in the community, not only in cost side of things, but also where we could be generating grand list growth, so that we can make some conservative assumptions that, okay, we may have this spike in debt service as a result of SMC during these years, but we do expect grand list growth to be some number that I think that we throw in there that we need to be conservative on, but nonetheless should plan for. So I think that's an excellent point, Matt. Thank you.
I don't know, just throw out, Tony had suggested in the chat too, to have a column header for Achieves EdSpec programming is also a scale we're weighting this stuff on. I think all of this is important, and it's all part of how we're evaluating the options, how we're going to present them, and, you know, kind of narrow them down in the end. So does anybody else have any comment on category, etc.? Going once. Any questions for Colliers as a follow-up? Okay, I see you put in the chat there, traffic. Go ahead. I don't know who's talking.
I just think some of these are going to have we have severe traffic issues both at the high school and the middle school. And I think some of these are going to impact it differently than others. So I'd just like to see impact on traffic as a header that we think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I had mentioned too, this is what's the object is to refine this through the options subcommittee as we're kind of working through the options. So.
Yeah, and I think what you noted, Chuck, about, you know, possibly weighting these because some may have more, you know, weight, for lack of a better term, or consideration than others. So good point.
All right, Chuck, did you want to give a schedule update? Anything further you need from SMC? Aside
no,
from
I think
obviously working with options?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're moving along pretty well with our schedule. I hopefully the committee can see where we're starting to get these options refined and getting a little more clarity, and with those more questions of considerations, you know, with these for sure. So that's normal for the process, I think, for any development like this. The one thing we're going to want to look at pretty soon, probably next month, is before we get too far and approve a final option, is engaging with the state, with OSCGR, and sharing some of the thoughts of these options with them, and procuring some preliminary feedback from that office. Because regardless of whatever option it is, especially for new and renovation projects where you're going to seek reimbursement, it's a great idea to have their input on your plan, and to understand if there's one option we're looking at and they say, hey, that's a no-go, well, you want to know that, obviously, and we want to know that probably sooner than later, before we spend too much time on any specific option. So that's one I think we talked in the subcommittee that we'd want to do probably sometime next month to do that.
Yeah, I think that's on the horizon there.
I do have one more observation, and this is related to our subcommittee, to the options subcommittee. So if you have been following our meetings, we've been focusing a lot on trying to guide Colliers and Maloney McBroom towards a consensus plan from the committee and something to focus on. But as we look and flip through the different options just now, can you go back to that, Chuck? I just want to make sure that we're on the same page and that we're running in the right direction. Because something that we've seen here is that
Did you want
there's
to see the
no-
PDF there, Renee, the different options?
Yeah, if you don't mind, if you can flip quickly through those slides, because what I want to show here is, and I can see nobody got sticker shock by any of these numbers through the meeting, but there's no $50 million option here. There's no $20 million option here. All the options that we're talking here over the 10-year period are much higher than that. And they actually all hover around the same amount, which is $200 to $300 million. So I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes the magnitude of the budget that we're talking about here, and that if anyone on this call feels that we are way out of proportion here, this is the moment to look at this in depth and see if we need to pivot in any way. And I know it's not just the capital cost. I know it's fine. At the end of the day, is the mill rate impact, but out of all the factors, the capital cost is probably the biggest impact to the budget that we'll have. So I just want to make sure that we all recognize that we're talking about a $200 to $300 million project here. Big picture.
Renee, is easy, what's your subcommittee? We haven't discussed any of this as a full committee or full commission. And are there going to be other options, or is the option subcommittee just assuming that these are the only options we're going to have in front of us?
Let me pause that for a second there, Matt. We have talked about the options. That's what we're doing right now. So if there's another way we want to go with anything, now's the time to spit it out. What the options subcommittee is doing is refining all the options that we come up with during the main committee meeting. So nobody's being excluded from any options. If we have anything that we want to keep exploring and it's worth exploring, I mean,
I
let
didn't
us
say
know.
anyone was excluded. I'm just asking if these are the only options that we are being presented, and we either have to yay or nay the options that have been presented. Is that what you're saying, Chuck?
I'm saying, do you have another option besides the 4/5 that we've looked at here or no?
To be honest with you, this is the first time I've looked at them, so I think we all should have a chance to analyze them and maybe come back with some questions at the next meeting.
Can I jump in? We have looked at these multiple times. They have been presented to us by Colliers in multiple meetings now. This isn't the first time we're looking at it. This is the first time we've looked at the details and the capital improvements and the timelines. However, anyone is welcome to suggest other options at any point. As a matter of fact, one of the options we're looking at in this plan is something that just came up last week that Rich had suggested. So there have been multiple options and multiple opportunities to bring up other concerns and other options. And you're welcome to do that if you have any, absolutely. But we are not going to delay this any further so people can think about it. We're at the point now where we are now whittling down some of these options. If you have something else to talk about, we can certainly talk about it. But there have been many, many discussions about all of these options already.
Jen?
Yep.
Well, I'll take a look at, I'll analyze these numbers and see if I have any questions.
Great, thank you.
Jen, yeah, Matt, just to respond, that's part of the reason we were trying to develop the matrix so that we could look at all of these options that we've looked at and categorize them into some hierarchy, basically, to see how they all worked out. That will give us a little time to sort out which ones we think are viable and which ones we think are not, because the more options we have, the longer it's going to take
to get something done. So as we find things that perhaps with that matrix don't seem to be viable, and we put less importance on those, maybe in that we will discover a third or another option. We've got so many now, the number doesn't matter. That would be a combination of some of those that would be present another option. But by getting the facts and putting it together on a matrix so we can say, compare one against the other, and to see if it's meeting the needs that were our objectives of the committee, will help to fine tune it. We have a very ambitious timeline. I am not in favor of pushing something to just get it done, but we've spent a lot of time on this committee right now, and it's time that we need to evaluate all of the work that we've done and come up with a basic idea of what is viable and what isn't so far. Each day we have a committee meeting. We have these meetings every Wednesday. You're welcome to watch them on Zoom. They're every Wednesday afternoon, and we've covered an awful lot of topics. And I know Jen and Chuck have had a lot of other things going on in the background, and we are open to any suggestion. But there comes a point where we have to look at the options that seem to be the most viable and move forward. Otherwise, we're never going to get the project done. It's like my family trying to get me to buy a new car because there's too many options. You narrow it down to 5, and then slowly you narrow it down from there. So I don't think we're trying to exclude anything, but we're trying to be more efficient in how we're looking at each of the options. My opinion.
I'm sorry that if someone thought that I was trying to include or exclude anything, but this is really the first time that we've looked at these numbers. And, someone said sticker shock. They're not shocking to me because we had an idea. If you read the report of 2017, 2018, it was still in the $425 to $450 million range as a total package. Of course, with the increase in inflation, they're going to be higher now. But no, it's. I would really like to analyze these numbers and certainly get some input from Jim Jascott and from our town council and from our board of ed. But I'm not looking to kick this. This can has been kicked down the road for so long. I'm not looking to kick it down the road any further. At the last meeting, I said we should bite the bullet and get this thing done. So no, I'm not trying to push this down at all. I just want to have time to look at these numbers and see what's best, for certainly the student population and the residents of Cheshire. Thank you.
So then we agree on that. And I think that that's what Mylone and McBroom and Colliers are working on, those numbers, and Jim Jascott's working, and the council has been to the last couple of meetings, and I know that they're following along. So you're right, we need to keep moving. So with that, I agree.
And I see your hand up there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually do have something that I'm wondering about. And that is, so we've got the 153 to 189 million for renovating CHS in various scenarios. I'm wondering if it's more expensive, or could it actually be less expensive to build a new high school on the same lot in a different part of the lot of the site? You could do it a lot faster. And does that save you enough money that it's worth it, that you build it and then you move the kids over and then disassemble where the other one is and make your parking lots and whatever
Chuck,
else?
I think that's option 4 that you just didn't get to yet. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we were just working on these and kind of honestly ran out of time before tonight to develop option 4. Certainly one is to build the new. I kind of want to take a look at the site too and kind of get at least a little bit of an idea of that feasibility. Because, but yeah, definitely to build new, because it is much more efficient, and we found it kind of makes sense. It's obvious, but new construction is more attractive to contractors than renovation. It's cleaner. They know what they're getting into. They're not phased. It's very attractive in bidding. And I think the big question with that option is, what do we do with the old high school? And we're going to develop both scenarios, whether it's renovate it, do assume some CIP money towards it, Do we demolish it and create site, parking lots, whatever have you with that? So we are going to develop those. We just ran a little bit short for tonight, but yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
All right, thank you, Chuck. Renee, did you have anything else in terms of a options subcommittee update? I mean, I think we covered a lot of the options stuff. You guys will be meeting, talk through the matrix. Anything else?
Yeah, so we'll be fine tuning the rating matrix and all of these other different materials to facilitate the discussions here in the big group. But I want to echo what Sylvia and others have said. We are not including or excluding anything. We're just trying to provide the tools required to analyze the different options that have been brought up here on the bigger group.
I think Tony had a question, Chuck.
Yeah,
in the
sorry.
chat.
Sorry, Tony.
No,
Go ahead.
I will bring this directly to the subcommittee, and I do want to thank the Options Subcommittee. I've been watching the videos after the fact. They're very helpful. And Marilyn, thank you for the wonderful notes. It's almost like I'm reading a great story. It's more detailed than I was expecting. But I think the answer to this question is yes, based on Vincent's ask last week. Is there a scenario where it just shows no new schools, perhaps no new major renovations, but capital improvement projects by school, and what that would cost, and if that would meet any of the needs? Because if I look at all the scenarios, they all contain in some form CIP projects by schools. And so that last one, the $15 million, $25 million low high range, on the face looks a lot more attractive, for SIP projects than obviously $90, $100 million. I just wonder if that's worth pulling together. So I'm pretty sure we'll be asked as this goes further, hey, what if we just did major projects? What does that do for us? Don't have to answer tonight. I will bring that to the committee on Wednesday. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Chuck, can I ask one question quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Jen. And I saw Rob come up too.
I want to go back to Renee's point about the sticker shock question. One thing to think about is that is the overall number of the cost of doing all of these projects. The one thing that's not factored in there, though, is the savings we're going to have as part of closing any of the schools. So while those numbers do look large, we also need to figure out what that cost savings is going to be and factor that in as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, definitely. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Chuck. And to follow up on Mr. Perugini's comments, when we're talking about, excuse me one second. Muted.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought I was still muted. My apologies. Follow up on Tony. The last thing the council is looking to do is to Band-Aid anything. So I want to be very clear that while somebody may be asking the question of what does just capital improvements to each school do, that may be a worthwhile exercise. That's really for you to decide. But I can tell you this, from my perspective and from what I know of the town council, if that plan doesn't meet the needs of the school system, we're not interested in seeing it. We're looking at a plan that certainly works for the schools, that can be rolled out in a fiscally responsible manner. Band-Aids are off the table from my perspective and from all of the council's perspective. So I know there's been some conversation about, well, it's just about a certain number. Let's keep it at 60 million or $70 million. That's not coming from the town council that I'm aware of. And it's really something that you all need to decide what works for the schools, but can be rolled out in a fiscally responsible manner. And what I would suggest is that now that you're getting to some of these capital numbers and you're seeing where they are, and I know, Renee, you've talked about, well, are we all comfortable with 200 million or 300 million? I'm not sure what I'm comfortable with until I see the full analysis. And I want to be very clear as one member of the council, it really goes back to what I said earlier. It's about how you implement this plan and what the net impact is to the taxpayers vis-a-vis the mill rate. And so what I'm going to be looking for, and I think the council is going to be looking for, is whether it's a $200 million plan or a $300 million plan or a $100 million plan, how do you plan on implementing it, in what phases, and what will the net impact be to the taxpayers as you roll it out? That's critically important in my opinion. And so I think there's a whole nother step to this analysis that you've got to bring into it, which is working with Jim Jascott in our finance department. And I know Tony from the Board of Ed's perspective, and certainly me as chairman of the council, will be more than happy to work with this committee in any way we need to help kind of slice and dice these projection numbers so that we can see if we can get comfortable with them. So I think that's important. I just want to make sure that you all understand where we're coming from, because nobody from the council is saying it's limited to this number amount and therefore let's go down a Band-Aid approach. We're already doing Band-Aids. We all recognize that. We don't need SMC to continue to do Band-Aids. We're doing them now. What we're looking for is something better than that. And I want to be clear from the council's perspective, that's the case.
No, thank you, Rob. I think that's important feedback, and certainly the route we're taking. So,
Yes, thank you. Don, go ahead. See your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to echo Rob's words there, because I don't want any of us to be wasting our time on this SMC if that's all we're going to do is come out and say we're going to Band-Aid everything. And that's was never my intention or anybody's intention from what I could tell. What I would suggest, though, is going off what Rob has said, is perhaps setting up a finance subcommittee from this group to determine, you know, to come up with all these numbers and everything else and work with Jim Jascott to get to where we know what the effect on the mill rate will be, what the effect on some of the other issues. Like, you know, I had a question for Chuck about, you know, the renovate to new. Are those numbers that you come up with based on a formula because of the size and size of the schools? Is that how you come up with those numbers?
Chuck, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so what we do, Don, in those assumptions, we look up, there's a form called the ED050. That's from the state that has the existing size of the schools. So we take that square footage that they have as the square footage for your schools to start with, existing. And what we do, and in all those numbers, we didn't provide any additions to them. It's all subject to when Malone does a scenario, if they redistrict any numbers and increase in enrollment, if there's a support of an addition, we would have to add it to those numbers. Just
okay, so an addition would have to be added. That's what I was going to ask next. Okay, and
yeah.
So, but if, like, say for instance, one of the schools has a newer HVAC unit or something like that that is good enough to use, then that renovate to new could drop a little bit. Correct?
Well, that's a good point, Don. And this is where it gets a little gray. Oops, sorry about that, NFL here. This is where it gets a little bit gray in that, and I think we talked about evaluating what schools. I think Tony mentioned is okay, CIP and what schools are in what condition, because in order to technically renovate a school by statute, you have to bring it all to a like new condition, new mechanicals, new electrical. So it's a fine line of evaluating, going, okay, do we really want to try and renovate it and use the like mechanicals for an example, maybe Highland, right? Okay, we don't have to touch that, but we do everything else. You're almost getting to a point where if we're going to tear apart this building, take down new ceilings, all the ceilings and the lights and so forth, it's almost, is it worth not doing it because you have all that material down? In order to do that later, you'd have to undo some of that work. So there's a kind of a gray area, right? It's a judgment call as to what items you wouldn't do in a renovation. But technically, renovation is all brand new in a nutshell. So.
All right. Yeah. To go back to my thing, I would suggest to this committee maybe forming some kind of finance subcommittee because I think the numbers are going to be probably one of the more important pieces after the ideas of which project we're going to go after. So that's just my suggestion.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback on what Rob Orris is saying is our next steps in this process, once we kind of, we kind of have the scenarios defined for the most part. There's a couple unknowns in each, but now it's starting to build out the schedule. Now we're going to take these projects, apply a schedule to those, and we're going to take these budgets that we have, the range, and go extract it and create a cash flow. And that cash flow is going to inform the town on, okay, when are these projects going to hit? How much are they going to hit on a monthly basis? over the next 10 years. And we're going to build that cash flow out for each of these different scenarios so Jim could take a look at it and incorporate it. And it's a team effort, right? We got to give him information so he can put it into his system and then feed it back to us and tell you what mill rate impacts and tax impacts mean.
And I think it's baby steps, right? So now we have the scenarios. We have about an average of what the capital budgets are. Now we jump to the next step. But I think it's important that each step we take, we understand what we're getting into. And I think we're getting to that understanding here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a good point there, Don, about the working on the finance side. And I think that's like the next step in developing these scenarios. I see 3 hands and then we can move on here. I saw Kate first, then Rich, and then Rob. Go ahead, Kate.
So to Tony's point about that scenario 5 that I brought up a few meetings ago, it really wasn't, none of us want that. None of us want to just put a Band-Aid on it. Not the town council, not the Board of Ed, not anyone on this committee who's looked at any of the schools and any of the information wants that. But I think it's a really good discussion point for those in our community who haven't been invested in the process as much, don't know as much about the difficulties with the school buildings and the lack of ADA compliance and the issues with the HVAC, to kind of quantify that for them. So when they say, well, we don't want to afford it, we want to do nothing, that they know it doesn't cost nothing to do nothing, that they understand what that cost is to just continue putting the Band-Aid on. And that's really what I think that scenario 5 does. It's not like an actual scenario that we're considering, but it's just a way to quantify that for people, for the community at large, when we start to get information from them.
Got it. Good point, Kate. Thank you. And Rich, go ahead.
I'm sitting here thinking about some of the different options that are out there, and we're looking at going in, doing capital improvements in some cases, doing renovations at new in some cases, and doing building brand new. And it appears to me that we need to somehow take a look at long-term costs. We do capital improvements, in 10 years from now, we still have an old building that's falling apart that maybe needs to be replaced. We do renovation at new, maybe we get 20 years and then we need to replace. We do a brand new building, maybe we get 30 years out of it. I don't know what the numbers and the years are there, but I do think that as we're looking at some of these costs, it may be a small delta between doing a, let's say, renovation and as a new versus a new school. But if it's going to be something that the town then has to put much less money into over a 10, 20, 30-year period, in the long run, it's going to be much less expensive. And I don't know how we show that, but I think that's an important piece for us to take a look at.
Thanks, Rich. I think that's a good candidate for a header on the decision matrix there. Go ahead, Rob.
No, sorry to belabor this point, but I think certainly Kate and Rich mentioned very good points. And my apologies, I thought I was muted earlier and nobody could hear me. But again, I can't underscore enough how important it's going to be to overlay this financial model with the benefit of the finance department, because there's so many moving components to this relative to debt service, what's coming on, what's coming off, certainly grand list growth. And the other thing that we haven't talked about, which I think is something this committee really needs to be focused on, is again, the impacts to the community financially. While we roll this out, we cannot, in my opinion, put our AAA rated credit rating at risk, because what that does for us is potentially change our borrowing base, the rate within which we borrow, and to have those kinds of significant changes could be significantly costly to the community. So I think this committee, as it rolls out its projections, needs to be working with an entity, i.e. Jim Jascott's group, that can pull some of this stuff together that you just don't have the intimate knowledge on, so that you can determine that, hey, maybe that $140 million plan through consolidations, et cetera, is actually cheaper to the mill rate or the taxpayers than that $80 million plan because of the savings and consolidations we get. So I think it's really important. Again, I apologize for underscoring this, and I am willing to walk this path with all of you to the extent I can, and I know I've talked to Tony Perugini, he is as well. The more we can collaborate on this relative to costs from the Board of Ed side, the council side, and what you all are doing, I think gives us a better shot of finding a plan that we can all get behind. And that's our goal, right? Our plan is to do something, not to do nothing. The last thing any of us want is to have a plan brought forward, it goes nowhere, and we're back to square one. That is not something any of us want to have happen. So, I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry I took up a lot of time tonight, but, I've been away from a few meetings, and I just wanted to make sure that you understood what I know of the perspective of the town council. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all very good input. One more look around. Anybody else got anything? All right. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Renee. And turn it back over to Jen. Go through the communication subcommittee.
Okay, thank you all for a very informative session on the update from Colliers. That was a lot of information, and I appreciate everyone's time in looking through it and digesting it and responding to it. So thank you. Moving on to the communication subcommittee, Rich.
Okay. Very quickly, Jen and I were on Cheshire Cast this past week. I don't think it's hit the airwaves yet, but we think it went really well. We'll find out when it actually is out there. It was upbeat. It was positive. The show's hosts were, I think, very in tune with what we were trying to communicate. So we're hoping that that'll get out there, and we would appreciate it when you see it, if you would, let other people know about it. We're continuing or beginning to work with the high school group on that marketing plan. We have a meeting on December 10th, at the end of this week, to talk with the students about it. Facebook has, it's not huge, but we have seen big increases over the month to month, over the last 28 days. 128% increase in the likes, over 1,000 increase in engagements, and 800% increase in people reached. So we continue to put stuff on Facebook. We continue to put some things on the community forum, on the education forum, and see where that goes. Kate, did you have anything else you wanted to add in on any of the social media?
No, we continue to grow slowly. We're at 383 followers on Facebook and up to 36 on Twitter. So if you guys could follow us and, get your friends to follow us, you tell two friends and they tell two friends, and all of a sudden we've started a movement. So if anyone on this committee can help us kind of grow that out and repost and reshare some of our posts, that would be greatly appreciated.
And we have gotten some comments through, which I know, Chuck, you said you were keeping track of those. So, I don't respond to those generally unless it's a simple question, but we know that they're coming to you. We've just begun looking to try to support a group that would help to communicate the proposals over the summer and into the fall. We're looking for names of people. We've pulled together a list and just starting now to reach out to some people. So over the next month, that'll be something that we're really working on. And that's all I've got. We're going to come to the survey proposal in a second, but Jen, you had the appointment of new member.
Yes, so there's a lot of work in the subcommittee for communications, and we decided that we wanted to add another member to your committee. Jim has sent out a few emails regarding trying to get public comment, seems very passionate about the issue, so we wanted to bring him on board. So we are going to be appointing Jim as a new member of the subcommittee, as long as there are no objections from anyone else on this committee. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns about this appointment?
No, we're quite excited to have Jim on the group. Definitely will use his expertise. We're just going door to door.
Thanks, Rich.
Okay, so it's finalized. Jim will be joining the committee, and Rich, I'm sure you guys will work on what needs to be done next.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then the last item that we have, which you've all seen, as you know, we've talked over the last couple of meetings about attempting to pull together some sort of a survey. And the committee had even gone so far as to try to come up with some questions and some things like that. What we realized as we struggled through the process is that we really did not have the expertise to create a scientifically designed survey and then be able to put it out there and do the analysis and all that. I know when I watched the options committee last week, that was a major discussion that had come up. And I believe it was Sylvia who talked at length about the fact that having some sort of an outside group do a survey might be very helpful. So when we had our meeting last week, Jen, I know, reached out and spoke to Rebecca from Malone McBroom. I know she was on at one point. I don't know if she still is. And she suggested a company for us to talk to. Jeff took that on, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to speak with them. You've seen the proposal that we have in hand. It's not inexpensive, but this is a top-notch group that will, we believe, do a very professional job. But Jeff, you want to take it from there and just talk a little bit about your conversation with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke with Jerry Lindsay from the Center for Research and Public Policy, and I appreciate the introduction, Rebecca, for us. He clearly was a very knowledgeable individual of what we're trying to accomplish, as he's done this for many other towns. His proposal is pretty in-depth and goes into that information, and we have it. We can share it with everybody to take a look at. I think more valuable to me at first, I'm thinking a survey is just kind of questions, getting you geared for the town, is having him as an ally to help us through this process, because he's done it with other towns. There's things that he brought up that, we might not think about as we're engaging with the town, and we can get an idea of what type of people are involved online versus the phone bank. He did stress for our type of project, the phone bank is the way to go. They would partner it with an online type survey, but he thought, in his opinion, that we would get a lot better results from a phone bank and calling people directly. They would also gear the results to us with some detailed analytics, which I loved for sure, and help break down, the different types of questions and what that means and what we can expect from those outcomes. And honestly, I think, especially given all of the back and forth with the many options that we have, Jeff Solon touched on this multiple times. Getting the feedback from the community, I think, is paramount as we move forward. We're a bunch of individuals that are trying to do best for our town and the kids of our town, but getting the feedback from the town itself, I think, would be very important, as we've seen with other committees. The Chapman property, for one, the survey results kind of really dictated, some of the direction and feedback from the town. And I think we would be at a disservice to the town to not do a survey, in my opinion.
So if you saw the proposal, basically it's a 60-day turnaround.
Right.
And it would be working with us to design the actual survey, the questions and the focus of that survey. They then would run the phone banks and with a contact group of 400 individuals. They also had an option in there for people who wanted to volunteer to fill out paper forms or whatever and not be part of the phone bank, that they would analyze separately. And then they would do an analytical report at the end of that process, which they would present back to the group. Jen, I'm not certain where you want to go with it from there, but that's the proposal that we have in hand.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Rich, is that they need about a 2-week lead time to get it up and running. Forgot to mention.
Yeah, and then they talked about having it done by the end of January, but that's when we first spoke with them, and clearly that's not going to work. It's going to, and I don't know if that's going to cause difficulty for the committee or not, but we need 60 days from the time that we give them the go-ahead to do all the things that need to be done.
Sylvia, I see your hand. Let me just do a quick thing and then I'll get to you. So our next steps really on this is to discuss it, and I will give everyone an opportunity to make their comments and questions. I did want to kind of mention though that we're doing this now because we feel it's important to have this information as we use that matrix that Chuck had brought up. So using that matrix and the weighting, all the different categories, and making sure that we are filling it out appropriately. I think using that, the town response, I think is going to be important. Also, Jeff Solon, if you had, you're still there, okay. If you had any comments about the report that you saw from Groton, I know you got to see an actual report that this company had already done and how valuable it seemed to be. I just wanted to throw that out there if you had any comments you'd like to make about that before we start going around to the rest of the SMC members to get their input.
Thanks, Jen. I just thought, I mean, and Jeff touched upon this a little bit too, that the detail of what was included in that report far exceeded what I had anticipated. And it really gave a comprehensive view of what people were thinking around not just overall costs, but various elements of projects, and really what their tolerance was for different components of the project, and like I said, overall cost. So it went beyond really what my expectations were, and thought it would be pretty valuable information for us.
Okay, thank you. So we all saw the proposal. The total cost is $17,000, and I did see that 60-day notice, but there was a caveat in there saying that if we needed it quicker, they could certainly work with us. So I'm hoping that maybe we can condense that down a little bit. So with that, I'll take some questions or comments. Sylvia, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. You covered some of my questions, so
Okay.
but I'm concerned that we are effective in our community. I think it's extremely important we get community feedback. What concerns me a little bit is doing it too early, and I'd like to hear people's feedback about this. We as a committee of 13 or 15, or how many of us there are, have a lot of difficulty narrowing down the options that we have. And I think, and I would have to think this through, I think I would like to maybe have the scenarios a little bit more defined before we ask questions and encourage more scenarios to be presented. I think if we, that it worries me a little bit, because I know that as a town councilor, on every issue that we have, we get responses from one end of the spectrum to the other. And I have found, at least, when there's a definitive plan to present, it's easier to navigate the responses and say, I don't like this because I love this because whatever. And if you give too many options, I'm afraid that you're diluting the information. On the other hand, what Jeff just said, it's great to have a depth of information. I get that. When you select those 400 people, I read that proposal fairly carefully, and the 400 people that would be the telephone surveyed people, how are those people selected? Is it a random selection? Is it demographically evenly skewed? How do we know that those 400 people aren't either all people at my age, or all people with no children, or all people with just school-age kids? How do they select that group? Do you know?
I can touch on that. Yeah, he did touch on that during our call. It is not random at all. They're strategically looking at people from different demographics, as well as different sections of town.
Okay.
So get kind of a good cross section. And it's not a random number, the 400. That's what they would think they would need to get an accurate feedback from a town our size.
And how do you engage those people? Because all of us have those myriad of calls that come through, and I just don't even answer the phone. So how am I going to know that if I happen to be one of the random people that I'd like to answer the phone and participate in that survey? How do they get through that initial barrier of so many random spam calls that we all get?
That's a good question, and I was wondering if perhaps we could have some sort of caller ID that makes it apparent that we're calling from the SMC or the town of Cheshire.
Okay.
And I'm not sure of the answer to that yet, but that's something that I'm definitely going to look into.
Right, because that would be a put off for me. I would, because if I don't know who it is, I don't answer the phone.
I don't either.
Well, and there's a lot of people that, don't have home phones either anymore. So.
True, that's
Well,
true.
they're going to call through cell phones, it said also.
Yeah.
And they will call multiple times. And then they talked about if somebody didn't want to do it, how one of the supervisors would talk to them. But you're right, Sylvia. In my house, we keep our home phone just hooked to a answering machine because we don't answer that phone at all.
All right, so Sylvia, did you have anything else?
Yes.
Okay, so I saw Chuck, and then I saw Matt, and then I saw Don. So we'll go in that order next, and then we'll move on from there. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I had a similar concern to Sylvia as far as doing it now. Like, what are we actually trying to gain out of the survey that's going to help us with the recommendation? And does it make sense to do it now versus when we have scenario a little farther developed, as she's saying?
And we could, put it off as much as this committee would like. Initially, when we first started talking about it, we had 4 scenarios sitting on the table, and we wanted to get some feedback from the community on the scenarios that they felt strongly about, but also financially what people were willing to take a look at. We have more complexity right now, but we were always looking towards this group trying to come to some conclusion by the end of January. So that's initially what we were pushing for. There's nothing that says we have to. If this committee says, let's hone down the options, the scenarios first, and then go out with a smaller group. I know Sylvia, I was just looking at the report that came through on the Chapman property, and I love the fact that it had 3 options. I could look at the 3 options. Oh, I like this one best. If it had 20 options, I'd probably still be looking at the.
Right, that's my point.
I guess that's my question is, if we're looking at a decision matrix, what question are we looking to have answered by this survey versus what we can kind of come up with the scenarios and the financial impact that Rob has been talking about?
Yeah. Well, that's why they would have to work with us in developing the questions.
Yeah, and I think it gives us a sense of the appetite of the public and a sense of need coming from the public that either 1, we haven't thought of, or 2, we could be spending a lot of time on these scenarios when the results of these surveys might dictate that there is 0 appetite for that, whatever that scenario may be.
And what are the things that are most important to people in the community? If it's recreational activities, and you can point to that as part of this program, that helps to sell the program. So, you get some idea of the various groups that are out there. I know when we first started setting up the communication committee, we looked at some of the different groups that are out there, parents with children, people that are older, et cetera, et cetera. And they're looking at this in different ways in terms of, what is important to them, and potentially what use will they get out of these facilities.
And I think it's a way to engage people in a wider, broader way than we've engaged them before. When you get that survey and you hear or see those questions, you have a much greater understanding about what the project is. So not only does it give us information about how attractive is it and how important are these values to you, what do you value when it comes to modernizing schools, but it also helps us communicate out to the community what we're doing and what we're thinking when it comes to the project.
Okay, next was Matt. Go ahead.
I agree with Sylvia and Chuck also. The question I really have, though, is, are these, are they going to be 40 full surveys? So they're going to, if they have to call 200 numbers or 500 numbers to get 40 people to react to this survey, is that what they're going to do?
400, Matt. They're going to call. They have to come up with 400 responses.
400 contacts.
400, yeah, responses,
So
positive.
400 responses So we're guaranteed to have 400 responses to this,
Yes, yeah.
not just 400 tries or 400, if someone hangs up, it's counted as a try.
No, they actually have to have 400 people complete the questionnaire. And then there's another paper thing that can be done also. And they talked about one of the schools, I think it might have been up in Farmington, where they had over 1,000 other people who chose to, participate also. So going back to Kate's point, there's others that can be. But the phone calling, they will have to identify and make contact and have 400 people respond.
I think that's excellent. I think that would be, a great cross section. But one of the things that I think is going to be important is I think if someone were going to survey me, it would certainly be simple for me to say, I would love to have the schools renovated or a new school or whatever, but somehow, somewhere, there's got to be some sort of cost factor, I would think, to it. We're not just going to say, or I don't know what their questions would be. Would we see their questions prior to them making the calls?
Yeah, they want to work with us in developing the questions.
Okay,
So,
good.
we'll be part of that process. And that's exactly the kind of thing you're going to look at. Everyone would say, yeah, I'd love to have a brand new high school. And then when they find out the cost, they might say, well, maybe not. Those pieces have got to come together in terms of the need, but you're also in the process educating them. So people may not know that, for instance, we have a bubble coming at the elementary level, or increase in students may not be a bubble.
Okay.
So depending on the way you ask the questions, it may be, we have X number of students projected to enter our elementary school over the next several years. Here are 3 different ways that could be dealt with. Which way would you support? That kind of thing. But they're the experts on designing the questions. We tell them, here's the issues, here's what we're looking at, and then they'll design the questions. And that's where we got into it, as we started to work. We don't have that expertise. We can kind of gut out what we think what we're looking for, but they're experts in how to design these things.
Thank you.
And a lot of the questions that they ask in their surveys, and the one that I saw anyway, it was more about the perception of the town too, and getting a feel for what's important to them. So not only in costs, but what's important to them as far as facilities and sports fields and all sorts of things. So we can get a good handle on what it is that's important to the town, and use that in our decision-making process too. Don, you had something, a question?
Yeah, I want to just echo everybody's sentiment about doing this a little too early. I think there's that question list could be very long if we start now, and I think narrowing down some of the scenarios would be a lot better way to do it. But I had a couple questions. I'm not big on surveys, so is 400 for a town of our size normal? It's like about 1.5% of our population. Is that a good litmus test to tell what is, what people are thinking in this town? And number 2, are they also going to be surveying our businesses, who are some of our biggest taxpayers, and get their input on it as well?
Rich, do you have an answer to that?
Well, I could touch on the 400. The business is a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, I was actually surprised that the number was that low, given our population. But with their experience, I would rely on it. And they, when I spoke to him, he said that 400 was a good sample size for a town of our size.
And they're statistical experts. They know how many they need in order to get some information. I don't recall anything in there specifically focusing on the business community. That, I suppose, is
I
something.
think that's important that we focus on some of the businesses, because they're some of our biggest taxpayers, and we should get input from them as well.
Yeah, and that's something we could talk with them about.
Good point.
Okay, anyone else have any comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I was just going to say,
is, looking through this report, you've got the town of Westport did 400 questions, and you did the Guilford did 502. So, and I want to thank Arnett for getting me a copy of the proposal.
Yeah, so they're statistically looking at the size of the town and the kind of things, information we're looking for. And, I'm certain that that 400 number was not just, grabbed out of a bag somewhere.
Okay, Andrew, did you have something?
Just a process question. Do we have the budget and mechanism to hire these folks?
Yes. It's $17,000. We currently have more than that left in our budget that we are allocated from the town council. There's currently approximately 34,000 left in what we have to spend. So the money is there. However, because we haven't sent this out to bid to other companies, we do have to get an exception waiver from the town council. So that will happen tomorrow if this does pass today.
Great, thank you.
I just have a quick question, Jen. If we do this, sooner rather than later, and we use the survey as a way to sort of come up with the headers for the matrix, right? If we ask questions in a way that gives us an idea from the public what's most important to them, it gives us a way to not only come up with those headers, but also come up with maybe some weighting of those headers. That's an argument for doing it sooner rather than later. But how long can we realistically wait to continue to analyze these scenarios?
Not very long, which is one of the reasons why I would like to proceed sooner rather than later. I do want to get that information from the town. I think getting information quickly is better, only because why would we wait? I hear everybody's arguments and I understand, but why would we not get as much information as we possibly can to make these decisions? I feel it's important to hear from the town, and we don't get a lot of public comments. So this might be a way of hearing from the town. As also, it takes 60 days to get this information back. By the time 60 days is over, we're getting very close to that March 1st deadline where we have to report back to the town council with our recommendation. So delaying this any longer, I feel, is a risk. And I feel like we are withholding information if we don't go forward with it now. We need to get this information soon so we can process it and understand it and apply it to what we're trying to do. Anyone else have any questions? Chuck? And then Sylvia.
The question of why delay it any longer, I think, is really the first option would be to build the middle school first, and then the other renovations we talked about in the high school at the end first, do the high school first and the renovation of the other schools at the end, flipping those around. What are we really trying to gain by the survey? Are you asking them to weigh in on the two options? Because I just don't see how it's going to help develop what our recommendation to the town council is at this stage. I think a survey would be more beneficial later on once we kind of have the scenario further developed to kind of see where the public stands on that.
So I guess it depends on the way we phrase the questions. So are we asking them, hey, tell me if you like 1 or 2 better? Sure, we need to kind of have 1 and 2, not 1, 2, 3A, 4B, 7C, whatever. I understand that. But if we're asking questions like what's important to you, or what's your threshold for being able to handle additional taxes, I think those are more generic questions that we can use to apply to our decision-making process.
And just the second part of that, is it possible to also weigh, get a survey to include maybe their opinion of cost for school modernization versus some of the other capital costs that have been proposed in the town, in particular, like Bartlett South that was discussed the other night, if that was an option.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow along.
So I believe there is some proposals or costs out on the table for other improvements in the town, not necessarily related to schools, that may affect what would be available to spend on the schools. So if we could get an opinion of what that might be with the public versus schools.
Okay, so asking them, if they're weighting something like the Bartlett South project higher than the schools, or if they would prefer to do schools over the Bartlett South project, something like that, you're asking?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Yeah, we could certainly talk about it with the team and see if that's something that we could ask them.
I think we want to get some information from the town council about what their plans are for some of these other projects. For instance, I don't know that the town council is looking to do a $14 million bonding in order to do Bartlett South. So we could be setting up a straw man. You know, we have to be careful what we throw out there.
Absolutely. All these questions need to be vetted, and I'm trusting this vendor to be able to help us get to a statistically significant question and answer process. And I feel like also, you know, reaching out to these 400 people, like Kate had mentioned, is really important, because from our own, you know, publicity or marketing standpoint, we want to make sure that more people know about us, the better. And this is even a good way just to get people to find out about us too. Thank you for being so patient, Sylvia. Go ahead.
That's all right. I understand where you're coming from, Jen, but I have to still disagree a little bit. And the reason is, I don't think we have enough information to base our questions on to get an accurate response from people, because we have not, as Rob said, we have not come up with a financial plan as how it's going to impact them. So if we put it out soon in the next few weeks, we don't have those numbers yet. But if we wait 30 days or 60 days, we do. And there's still time between there and the time it goes to the council. I think you will propose it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, if you're still here. It will go to the council in March, but we will not make a decision about what you're bringing to us that day when you do it. Therefore, there is room for us to hear all of the information and to tweak and change the plans. And I also would not get involved in confusing two issues and having anything to do with Bartlam Park. This survey is about the schools, period, end of sentence. And we need to present the financial impact of this project and let the Bartlam Park one stand on its own. That would be my opinion. That's all.
Thank you for your input.
I think it should wait for at least a month before you start asking questions.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments? Oh, Tony, go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. I would say initially I would have been in favor for a survey too early in the process. I still open to it. I think because of COVID, we didn't have the intimate public accessibility to have open forums. The last master plan, there were 3 or 4 targeted open forums with various demographics in town where people just showed up, you know, at town hall or, you know, one of the schools, and we went through various scenarios. But at that point in time, we didn't have all the options nailed down, but we did use the feedback to kind of hone in on some of the criteria we're using. So I can see how the survey could help us with shaping the questions on the spreadsheet early on. I also agree with Sylvia that's a little early as we don't have all the details, although they're quickly arriving. I think since the last plan went out and there was a lot of public input after the fact, I think this time around the public will be looking for a lot more detail, especially on cost, value proposition, et cetera. So some ways I agree with Sylvia that we should probably get it going, but be ready for that time period in late January, maybe February, where there's more information available. I would also say that each one of us on SMC was chosen, you know, for a number of reasons. Obviously, the great qualities you all bring to the table and all the work you're doing, but we also represent some form of demographic in our town. So I think we also bring some of that feedback now to this group from our people that we know and reach out to. Granted, it's hard to do with COVID. So, you know, remember that. There's also some surveys from Cheshire Public Schools. You know, Jeff can forward them later on if they're already not in the CPS packet. But there was a 2018, I believe, school climate survey, it was a communication survey. There's some good information in there that might help, because sometimes we do sprinkle in there topics that are not directly school related, like facilities and recreation space, et cetera. It might be helpful to this committee. The last thing too is I think this committee should do everything possible to narrow down the options before it goes out to survey. And I think we can do that. I don't think we need the survey to have that, but I'm open to it. The point is, the more details, the better before that goes out. That's all. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Rob, go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. And Ms. Nichols, you are correct. The March 1st date is the date where the council is looking for the proposal from SMC, but that is not the date that we're going to be looking to approve it. There will be more time after the March 1st date to kind of further deliberate this, to talk about it, collaborate on it. And I think you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next really important date is the June submittal to the state in order to pursue potential grant money. So sometime between March and obviously getting ready for that June submittal, we're going to have to hone in on, do we have a final plan? Is it acceptable, and which is it? But you're correct, Ms. Nichols. March 1st is really just the first submittal of what you're proposing. And I know the Board of Ed has the same kind of time frame. By that date, you need to do the same to them. The only other thing I would add is to follow up on Mr. Walsh's comment about making sure that we get a sense of what the business community is thinking. We clearly want to understand what the residential side of our community is thinking relative to SMC, but we cannot afford to not think about what the larger taxpayers in our community and how they could be impacted. What could be a $400 or $500 impact to an individual average taxpayer could be significant to some of our larger taxpayers relative to our business community. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. And that's why I continue to underscore the fact that we need to do this forecasting in order to really get down to what the net mill rate impact is. Because I'm in the real estate development business, and I can tell when I go into a community and the mill rate starts to approach 40 mills or get over 40 mills, I see hesitancy relative to the business community in terms of wanting to locate in those communities because of reimbursement for taxes, personal property, etc., real estate taxes. So I caution the group to make sure you're thinking about that, because we can ill afford to lose our largest taxpayers in this community, because all of a sudden we've taken our mill rate from what it is at 33 mills to 40 mills. And now the average taxpayer costs maybe $400 or $500 a year, but to that company could be $500,000 or $1 million a year. That is something I think you all need to be considering as we model this and we forecast this forward. So, Don, I think that's an important point.
So when we work with the vendor, we'll definitely make sure to mention that and ask about it and how we reach out to those businesses as well. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments? Okay, so with that, we will take a vote and see if this is something we'd like to pursue now. Not sure what the alternative would be. Is it that we bring it up bidding, or is it that we propose that we do it in, say, 30 or some random odd number of days? Does anyone have any thoughts on that, on whether or not we just table this until next meeting, or if we want to give a certain number of days where we visit it again, if this does not pass now? Tony, go ahead.
I would gauge this consensus to bring in a firm to do a survey in general, which I think there is. So I guess the question is, do we risk anything by tabling it and visiting it later in the month, early January? Does it jeopardize our timeline to say, even do a survey in mid-March if it takes 2 months, that we need to take action now? Is there a way to at least, I don't know, lock them in and get them going when we're ready? I'm not sure how we could make that happen.
I don't know the answer to that. Rob, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt again. I might make a proposal. Since we have a council meeting tomorrow and this is on the agenda, I might propose that you at least advance this so that the council can deliberate over this bid waiver issue tomorrow. Therefore, it gives you the flexibility as a committee, assuming it gets approved tomorrow, which I think it will, to kind of dictate where and when you want to do this work. At least you've approved it, the council has approved it from the bid waiver perspective, and you all can decide, where and when you want to roll this out. But at least you've got all the approvals you need. What I worry about is if you decide in 3 weeks that you want to advance this, when we have to advance another council meeting, it might, timing-wise, might not work out. Now, we can always have a special meeting for you all if we need to, but just thinking about this logistically, it sounds like you want to do it, you just don't know when. So let's advance it, let the council opine to it tomorrow, and then you've got everything you need, hopefully subsequent to the council meeting.
Great, I think that's a great plan. So maybe the motion we passed today then is that we want to proceed with this survey. However, we need to table the actual date of when we want to execute it. Does that make sense for everyone?
Why don't you just ask for a bid waiver?
Yeah, the vote should be to do the survey, and then we can kind of decide when we feel it's the most appropriate time-wise.
Of course,
Okay.
and you'll pursue a bid waiver from the council tomorrow, and it's left
Yep.
in all of your hands to decide when you want to execute the survey.
Okay.
Right.
So
Perfect.
who would like to make that motion? Chuck, I know you had some wording that you wanted to, or you had that we could do, but that's gonna have to change a bit. Would anyone else like to phrase that in a motion?
I'll make the motion for us to proceed with a survey.
And request that
And
the
request
town
it.
council offer a bid waiver for the amount of $17,000. And that the committee at a future meeting determine the timeline to follow.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
What,
Anyone against? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody.
So I don't think the language changes, Jen, or I don't need to read it.
No, you're done.
Perfect.
Nice job, Chuck. Okay.
My mother always told me, when you hear what you like, don't say anything more. You got what you need, Chuck. You're good.
Okay. Anything else, Rich, from your subcommittee report?
Nope, we have an upcoming meeting next Monday, I believe it is. And everyone's welcome to log in.
Okay, thank you very much. Next item is a report from the SMC. Anyone on the, sorry, from the Board of Ed SMC members. Does anyone from the Board of Ed have anything to report back to us from the Board of Ed? Tony?
Very quickly, the board did meet before Thanksgiving. Just want to say that Andrew and Ann walked the Board of Ed through a summary of the options. In fact, Andrew put up on the screen the options at the time, just so the board can get a refresher. And I think they're going to do that at each meeting moving forward. The other thing that's moving on the Board of Ed side is we're setting up Board of Ed Planning Committee of the whole, starting hopefully this week, hopefully Thursday, where the board can meet, the entire board membership can meet under planning and simply discuss these options being considered by, simply so that we're not waiting and you're not waiting on us to get feedback. As things materialize, we'll use those meetings to discuss amongst ourselves. If there's any feedback that you need to receive, we'll make sure it gets to you timely manner. Likewise, if they have any questions, we'll relay it to you. My goal would be, if there's anything in the options, whatever that ends up being, that it's just simply a non-starter for the board and there's consensus around that. You should know that, so that we can adjust or maybe take it off the list if it makes sense, so you're not wasting your time. Nonetheless, we're here to help, ready to give feedback with you along the way and make sure that by March we all have something successful. So those meetings will start hopefully this week. I have 2 more in January and more as we near the deadline. And of course, as those meetings are scheduled, I'll make that available to the SMC in case you want to view in and see what we're talking about. Other than that, That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next item is report from the town council members. Anyone have anything to report from town council? Rob, go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. And we've talked about a number of items already earlier tonight, so I won't regurgitate them all. But as you know, Jen and Chuck, you guys had some questions regarding the deliverables that the council expected for March 1st. So Chuck, Jen, and I in our net met via Zoom about a week ago to kind of answer some of those questions. And as we talked about, I think it's the council's expectation that while you will all be bringing your proposal or recommendation or recommendations to the council, and one of the questions came up from Chuck is, well, could we have more than one plan? And my comment was, sure, I certainly, I don't think we want too many plans, but if you had one plan and a second plan as a backup that you wanted to have some dialogue on, I wouldn't see any issue with that. So that was the message that I relayed to Chuck and Jen on behalf of the council, that that certainly that would be appropriate, because the March 1st date is not the end date. It's really just the date that you need to bring your proposal or proposals to the council. There will be more time to deliberate and collaborate on that, not only with SMC and town council, but certainly the Board of Ed's involvement as well. And as I said to them in that meeting, this really needs to be a collaborative effort of all three groups with input from the community. That's what this has to be. And I think it's the best chance for us to have a plan that's workable for all. And so I think the more that we can collaborate, as Tony said, ahead of time, certainly the Board of Ed is going to be doing that. I can tell you from the town council side, most of our members, if not all, have been paying close attention to your meetings, are up to speed. We're trying to do our part as the fiscal side of this. And we are happy to walk this path between now and March 1st and thereafter to collaborate and assist in the process as best we can. Because I think the best plan will evolve with all of our input. So we're happy to do that. We talked about, kind of some of the analytics that we're going to be looking for, which I explained earlier, which is really getting into what is the net impact to the mill rate, what it looks like over the course of some period of time that you roll this plan out. And again, we're going to need input from other areas of staff to say, okay, maybe there is a service, i.e., let's say Bartlam Park plan. School modernization should assume that everything else in the community stops. So we're going to have to continue to provide other services to this community that they expect. And so that's our role. And that's what I think staff can help you do as you begin to roll this plan out. What's coming on in terms of cost, what's coming off, what bonding may be coming off, what else might be added. And oh, by the way, what good grand list growth can we count on with additional revenue that we can help offset this plan? And I think we can collaborate over that. And I see, Jim, you've been on this call and you're on a lot of calls, Jim Jascott. He can bring a lot of information to that table that I think will be very helpful. So I think that summarizes kind of where the council is. Again, I want to underscore, we're not looking for a Band-Aid. We want to make sure that we marry the needs of the school system with the fiscal capability of our community. And that's all of our community, all of our residential tax base, including our businesses. It's not an easy task, folks. I get it. But we're going to have to work shoulder to shoulder to try to get to a plan that accomplishes both. I think it's the only way we're going to be successful. So I think we're all in, we're all willing to work hard. And I can tell you, the council is not looking to, come up with a plan that is just a Band-Aid approach. That is not the case. We're doing that now. We don't want to continue doing it. And again, we don't need SMC to continue to Band-Aid. We can do that without SMC. So that is not something we're looking for.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else from the town council?
He said it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on then to item number 9, public comment. Chuck Warrington, do you have a list of public comment items?
I'd have to check, Jen. I don't know if we've updated it recently, to be honest
Okay.
with you. I'll have
Okay,
to double.
just checking.
Let me check with John, make sure we get all the comments from Rich. We've incorporated those and we'll.
Okay,
we'll
I'll
have those
toss
ready
it
for
over.
next meeting.
Okay, I'll toss it over to Arnett then. Is there anything?
Thank you.
Friend?
Yes, we have a couple of comments from on this.
So excited.
Sorry. Yes.
Go ahead.
And I will forward them to you all, but we have a couple of thoughtful comments from Mr. Brian Lopez. We've been emailing a little back and forth, and I will share those emails. One of them is very long. I will share that with you as soon as the meeting is over, when we can add it to our list and
Okay.
consider it. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we also received another email from, I'm just going back so I can look at the contents of it again. We received an email from Matthew Swanson that you sent to us, and I believe that has been sent to us since the last meeting. I'm sorry, I should have printed it ahead of time. But he was talking about how he is in favor of a new or renovated high school and starting with the high school first. So that is something that we will add to our public comment log. I'm getting lost in my computer here. Sorry. There we are. So we will add that to our public comment log and discuss it. It's obviously one of our options, and it's something that we're talking about all the time. So I don't really think there's anything we need to specifically comment on right now about it, but it is something that we're researching and looking into, and we'll give it the utmost attention and thought and analyze the details of it. So I think that was it. So Chuck, for the next meeting, can we have an updated log and be able to go through any outstanding issues at that point?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Next item is the meeting overview for December 16th. So at that meeting, we talked about possibly having the superintendent of South Windsor at our meeting today. That did not happen, obviously, but we were reaching out to her to see if she could possibly come to our next meeting. So I believe Mr. Solon, Dr. Solon, or Chuck Warrington, either one of you were going to reach out to her to see if she was able to come to our next meeting. Jeff, was
Yeah,
that?
I've been in contact with Dr. Carter, and she's definitely willing to come and speak with us.
Okay.
And we'll just
We
have
just
to
wanted-
coordinate to get together
yeah,
with her beforehand.
We wanted to talk to her about what it is we were looking for ahead of time. So I'm not sure if that got communicated yet or if there's something we need to do still on that end, but I'm hoping that she'll be able to come to our December 16th meeting.
Yeah, I'll confirm, Jen, and then follow up with you
Okay.
and Chuck on that and
Okay,
coordinate it.
great. Thank you. The next meeting also we'll talk about options again. We'll go through all the money issues. And as I'm talking about that, I also want to go back to a comment that was made in this meeting about creating a subcommittee to review the financials. I think it's a really good idea. I'm considering actually doing that probably in our next meeting. So if everyone's in agreement with that, I'd like to kind of put that out there and say, I think that's something that we can probably put together at our next meeting. Between now and then, if anyone would like to be on that committee, please reach out to me and let me know. And we will talk about it in more detail at our next meeting. But if you'd like to be on it, definitely email me and we'll see what we can put together. Excuse me, see what we can put together for the next meeting. We'll talk about the objective of that subcommittee and what it is we're specifically asking for once we give it a little more thought. Since it just came up tonight, I'd like some time to think about it and figure out what the logistics of it would be and the objective. So think about that. And if anyone would like to be part of it, send me an email. And that's it for the next meeting. It's going to be on December 16th. It will be at 7 o'clock and it will be via Zoom. And with that, I'd like to go into executive session. Would someone like to make a motion to go into executive session with Colliers and MMI and the staff, CPS staff?
So moved.
Thank you, Jim.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay.
And just give Mike Salamini a minute and he'll let us know when he's got the
And-
cameras off.